started out studying biology in Constance and then moved to Tübingen because at the time, this was the only chair of biomathematics in Germany. And so after graduating in biology, I was looking for a PhD thesis which would combine the two topics. And so I was looking for PhD positions and supervisors. And then I came across in the library of courses on environmental epidemiology and environmental health. I further looked to positions and applied for scholarships and was lucky to find a position with Eric Wichmann, who was moving at the time to the GSF or to the research center in Munich, and had an open PhD position, and was also very intrigued that I had submitted a one-year scholarship application to the German Scholarship Foundation. And so if you would like, that would be a great position for you. And I said, oh, this sounds really interesting. And there's also this group we are collaborating with at Harvard who are interested in the same topics, and we have actually collected with them the air pollution data. So I started in this area, and I was fortunate that I had like 5 months starting in Germany and then going to Boston and taking courses there. During my PhD, I worked on the link between air pollution and asthma exacerbation. And this study was exciting at the time because it was done shortly after the German reunion, when the air pollution concentrations in Eastern Germany were still very high. My PhD supervisors at the time were able to convince colleagues in the Czech Republic to also do similar studies. And there were novel measurements of air pollution implemented together with Jack Spangler from Harvard. And so we had a lot of data collected in interesting situations and a connection to the Harvard School of Public Health. And so it was my role to analyze this data, and I actually learned it at the Harvard School of Public Health to apply these methods, and then kind of translated it and finished my PhD. What then came about is that after I had finished, it turned out that in addition to these measurements of sulfates and acidity of particles, German colleagues from our research center also had looked at particle size distributions. And so we were for the first time able to look at the health impacts of ultrafine particles in asthma patients. And this was really exciting because I was able to visualize this data and had also colleagues who worked on the toxicology of these ultrafine particles. And out of these quite intense discussions, we were able to show that these ultrafine particles did indeed increase asthma symptoms and reduce lung function. This was one very important early observation I made. And the other piece which kind of drove a lot of my research was the identification or the observation made by many colleagues, but led by Joel Schwartz at the time, that variation, day-to-day variation in air pollution does not only leads to hospital admission for respiratory disease, but also for cardiovascular disease. This was really a surprise, and actually by the critics of the results of studies was actually used as a counter argument, because people were wondering at the time, how can an inhalation of a particle lead to exacerbation of myocardial infarctions? What were the underlying mechanisms? And so we started to design studies, both on the Boston side, but also based on European funding, together with colleagues who I've met through my first ISEE meetings. We designed studies to investigate that. And we also started to use data from previously conducted epidemiological studies to understand heart disease itself. And I was able to, for the first time, show that during an air pollution episode in the mid-80s, actually,
there were biomarkers changing. So this was an area where we started to add air pollution measurements to a lot of existing studies. It was really fun to have this interdisciplinary connection, both across the Atlantic as well as in Europe. And through that and the ISEE, a lot of these studies and ideas were discussed and brought together. Were these ISEE meetings and the meetings of the American Thoracic Society, where the network of younger researchers, as well as the more established researchers, were meeting. And it was very exciting to have the connections to the senior investigators and learn from them, and also have like a peer group of people my age who were all thinking and discussing about similar things. And the ISEE was really very important in providing these possibilities. I became president-elect in 2011 and had the pleasure to work with Dean Baker, who I felt was really the memory and of the ISEE for really more than a decade. What was actually happening at the time was that the policy committee was formed. Also, the chapters were formed. So the European chapter was formed. And there was discussion about forming the Asian chapter. And this at the time showed that the ISEE had grown substantially, and that also this was the time where the international reach had really increased. It was also the mission at the time to foster more exchange or engage also with the wider world and become a more global institution. And I think that was also due to the fact that environmental epidemiological research had started to pick up in Asia as well as in many areas around the world. It was actually fun to be president and, for example, securing the lineup of follow-up conferences. So during my presidency, there was the conference in South Carolina and in Basel, but we were able to secure that we're able to go to Seattle, to Sao Paulo, to Rome, and to Sydney, and thereby kind of covering North America, covering Europe, but also South America, and Sydney was chosen to be in the Pacific region. Yeah, very nice to see the scope expand and also see ISEE become stronger in Europe and starting to have an independent voice. It was an exciting time. It was also a time where we still were in the financial situation was more difficult, and we also realized that the scope was increasing. People did not renew their membership as much as they should, and so it was a transition period of the organization. We joined the Joint Policy Committee statements on asbestos of the Societies of Epidemiology. But we did also much more. So we engaged with the IARC and kind of debated about the policy of an ongoing study. We wrote to the Rotterdam Convention. I learned that it's sometimes not enough to have sufficient scientific evidence, because when I started, or as a president was responsible for these actions and activities, I thought, oh, asbestos and cancer is such a clear story. It shouldn't political complications or any issues. However, what I learned that as long as you have countries which are not banning asbestos, who are trying to use asbestos to as much as they can, things are not easy. And again, science maybe question. This was really interesting, and I was in a way naively started this process and this discussion. But I think we, in the end, had impact, and we had flagged potential issues. And also at the time, the status of the ISEE as a non-governmental organization and the recognition for the membership itself that we actually can have that status, and in this role can also voice opinions and start engaging into discussions was kind of revived through the foundation of the policy committee and the stand we took on asbestos or air pollution at the time. But I think also it was a start where it really started to grow into the more professional organization it has become by now, and which is really, I think, the credit of the presidents who came after me.